everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Divorce and Separation Coach podcast. Today, we're going to dive into a topic that many parents quietly wrestle with, and that's covert recordings. So when you're in the heat of an argument with your ex or your soon-to-be ex, and you click record because you feel like that's going to really be the silver bullet once you get to court. It's going to show the judge who your ex or soon-to-be ex really is, and it's going to help your case. A lot of people discover that unfortunately, these recordings aren't always accepted the way they're expected. The Family Justice Council recently released a detailed report over recordings, and they highlighted when such evidence can be genuinely used and when it's likely to harm, and why context, intention, and reliability matter far more than the recording itself. So in this episode, we're unpacking what the guidance really means, what it means in practice, and what you need to know before deciding whether that secret recording is worth relying on. To talk about this, I've invited Claire Webb. Claire has worked in family law since 1990, and she qualified as a solicitor in 1998. Together with Rebecca Hawkins and another local lawyer and mediator in 2007, they founded Mediation Now. In 2010, Claire stepped down from her director role in a legal practice to focus on mediation and reducing parental conflict for children. Known now as Family Solutions, the organization focuses on non-court resolution, offering legally aided and privately funded mediation, collaborative practice, arbitration, parenting coordination, and supervision. Claire, it's brilliant to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, it's lovely to be here.
I'm really looking forward to this topic because it's something that comes up a lot with clients where, they're recording their ex and they feel like that's such compelling evidence. And sometimes they're disappointed when they get to speak to their lawyer or even take it to court. So maybe we start with the basics. And how do you define covert recordings?
Absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right, Chloe, that people are using it more and more. And I think because everybody has a phone in their pocket and things like that, it's so much more accessible than it was 20, 30 years ago when, the Nokia brick, you wouldn't have managed to hear it. So it's something we have to be really alive to. So covert recordings are any recording that is made without the express consent or permission of the person that you are recording. Now, that can be either audio or just verbal. So, I'm sorry, audio or video. So it doesn't have to be one or the other, and it doesn't have to be in a certain setting. So it could be on a doorstep, it could be in a house, or it could be completely neutral. And you might be in Tesco's when you bump into somebody. So it isn't about the setting, it's about the permission and the knowledge of the other person.
Okay. So that's the importance of the word covert then. But of course, when people know they're being recorded, they don't behave quite the same way.
No, and that's why so many people do it, because as you quite rightly say, they believe that it's going to be the way to show the other person's behavior, what they have to cope with. When they're recording a former partner, they will often say, look at what I have to cope with. This is how they speak to me, or this is how dismissive a family member is to me. And when they're recording children, it's often about when they've been accused that the child doesn't want to go, they want to show how well the child goes and how happy they are and how much they enjoy it. And of course, I understand completely that wish, but it does have a lot of negativity that follows it. And it's not quite as simple as being able to say, here we are, I stood on the doorstep and they said, go away, I don't like you. And shut the door in my face. And that doesn't necessarily produce the outcome that you're hoping for.
So that's a good segue actually into what I was saying earlier around these new rules and how courts deal with these kind of recordings, which, as you say, are more and more prolific. What do they require? What are the criteria for these kind of recordings to be admissible? And what will a court look for?
Well, every case is individual. So there isn't a blanket, this is what you do to get it in. And it's almost the opposite, that you probably shouldn't do it unless you've spoken to your solicitors and actually got really good legal advice first, because often it is an own goal. So rather than looking at how can I make something admissible, you probably need to look at what can I do to show my evidence without having to use this method. And to your solicitors about it. So the starting point is definitely don't. There is a case called Reby, a child, right back in 2017, and the court was very clear that there's three distinct types of covert recording.
Yeah.
So there's the covert recording of a professional, there's the covert recording of a family member, which is often your ex, and then the covert recording of a child. And they look at each slightly differently.
Okay.
Now, the most serious is obviously the covert recording of a child. There's a lot of evidence that says that this can be quite harmful for a child to be recorded. There's also a whole raft of arguments about whether a guardian has to be appointed in the court case. So what normally happens is you have mum and dad, and then you have maybe a CAFCAS officer who is the court advisory service for children. If the court is worried about the well-being of a child, they will often provide a guardian for that child whose only area, if you like, is to look at what is in the best interests of that child.
Yeah.
And that guardian may feel, for example, that the child needs to be told that they were covertly recorded. Now, the problem with that is, of course, then you're bringing that child into adult proceedings. Depends on the age, but you can imagine if you're a 15-year-old, teenager with a lot to say on things, the thought of being recorded, you may not like it.
Of
and
course.
It could actually be detrimental to the relationship with the person who did the recording.
I would imagine it would be.
Yes. And so what we urge is real caution, because if that guardian feels that that child needs to know, then suddenly you're not only dealing with a dispute between you and the other parent, you then have a child with knowledge that, that wasn't nice, Dad, that was my privacy, that was my trust. Or
And
Mum,
you used me.
yeah.
So they might feel used. Yeah.
Yeah. And, they might be saying, Mum, I didn't really like that and I wouldn't have wanted that. Or Dad, why did you do this? I didn't give you my permission. And so it opens up that whole can of worms that is more than court proceedings. It's we all see all the time that one of the hardest things I think about court proceedings is that the professionals leave and you are left in with whatever order that might be, trying to actually parent. And whether you are seeing a child daily or weekly or monthly, if you have that really fractious relationship between the two parents or between you and the child, it is not going to go as well as if you can co-parent and everybody can accept the steps that you've taken. So it is something that people need to be really mindful of. Also, CAFCAS shouldn't really look at a covert recording without the court's consent. So what we see a lot happening is that people go to that initial meeting and they say, look at this, look, see what I have to put up with, look what they do, look how hard it is. And most CAFCAS officers will take the view that if you wish to make that recording admissible in court, then you have to do an application to the court. And then there's an awful lot of things that have to be considered before the court will allow that. And so, there is a whole, I call it satellite litigation. If you think it's expensive enough doing court proceedings, you then have a mini hearing about the issue. So you've got this recording, and the things that the court will be asking is, how did you come by it? Why did the other person not know? Did you have an opportunity to say? The authenticity, because of course nowadays, Panorama's the best example at the moment. You chop things together. Is it an accurate? The value of that recording, what does it actually show? Because what we all know, and we're all guilty of it, when we're in it, you think everything is going to help your case. And the professionals often look at it and think, oh, that's not that useful. And so sometimes we see recordings that you may feel, oh, goodness, this really shows my ex's behavior. And we say, yeah, it shows that she's not particularly nice and she doesn't like you. But actually, it doesn't show you that she's alienated the child, or that she's stopping the contact, or that he is behaving in a way that the court would say that contact isn't acceptable, or something like that. So it's very much about looking at the value of the recording. And then also the court has to weigh up the emotional and psychological harm of using it, because if one of you is exiting an abusive relationship and then someone is recording you, that can be hugely detrimental to
That's
that
true.
person.
Yeah.
And so they have to balance, what is the gain? What validity does it give to the court? How does it help the court make the best order that it can make, compared to what is the harm that it could do on anybody, whether that is
Yeah.
a parent or whether that is a child.
And the big risk
Professional.
also, I guess, sorry, just I guess the big risk across all of these recordings is that they're out of context, right? And how does the court deal with that? Do they need the recording to be of a certain length, or how would they make sure they have all the context?
And that's the biggest difficulty, because we all know that, one, you're unlikely to have pressed record right at the beginning, unless
Yeah.
you've gone deliberately to goad, in which case it's not going to look great. Often one person who's been doing the recording is perfect, because of course they know they're being recorded. So it shows a lack of authenticity, because
Sure.
one person's saying, please don't be unkind to me, that's not very nice, and the other one's shouting. So it doesn't represent what happens on a usual basis.
Mhm.
And of course, you might have said some absolutely hideous things just before you pressed record.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Equally, you might not. So, it's all of those balancing things, and it's what makes it so tricky. And it's probably why the court errs so much on the side of caution. There's a lot of cases and a lot of judicial guidance that says, the court must look at it absolutely in the round and see what benefit it brings before it should be admissible. It isn't something that should just be, easily allowed. Also, and I think this is really important, and this is a bit legal and a bit geeky, so I apologize. The recordings that go in are what's called hearsay evidence. So hearsay evidence is when it's not being given by the person giving evidence at that moment. So it doesn't have the same weight as if I'm standing in the court and telling my story. That is given more weight because the judge can look at my demeanor, look at my reactions, I can answer questions on it. This is a standalone item that
Mhm.
is just being played. So you can't ask somebody, how did you feel in that moment? Because although they could tell you to a degree, you can't possibly replicate it again.
That's a good point.
So it isn't as valuable as the evidence that any of us would give if we were in the witness box on the day, where we were saying, I can see that this happened, but this is how I felt, and talking it through. And
Yeah.
the judge gets an opportunity to ask you questions, the other side gets an opportunity to cross-examine you, and you have to answer, what's being put to you. So, although that's a bit geeky, and I apologize, it's just important to be aware that it's not as strong evidence, and the court has to look at what weight to give it.
Yeah.
So all the things that you've just said of how long it is, so the shorter it is, probably the less weight it would be given.
Okay.
How it's come about. If it was accidental, it might be given more weight, for
Hmm.
example. So
Hmm.
if it was picked up, I don't know, in some setting where neither of you knew it was being recorded, then that might
Yeah,
hold
your
extra
Ring
weight.
doorbell recorded it, or a CCTV or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something that you didn't know about, where you're slightly more authentic as a participant, is
Yes.
likely to be given more weight. So it's a really difficult balancing act. Just on the third category, those professionals.
Yes. Professionals. Yeah.
So absolutely, whatever happens, you cannot record the court. That is contempt of court. It cannot happen. You cannot do it under any circumstances, regardless. So you
Yes.
cannot turn your phone on in a court proceedings. That is absolutely not allowed. Um, if you cannot record a professional without their knowledge. That's
Okay.
basically the bottom line. Most professionals nowadays are very aware of disabilities and challenges that people have.
Hmm.
So, for example, I may not want to be recorded, but if you said to me, actually, I really struggle to retain all of this information, I might agree with you that I will send you a summary afterwards with all of the important points, plus a list of actions that you need to do.
Yeah.
So you need to have those conversations with the professionals that you have. There are different rules with regards to government bodies, and they're a little bit more strict. So if you're
Okay.
involved with children's services, for example, they have separate rules that you have to be aware of and you have to adhere to. But I'm thinking more of if you want to record your solicitors, for example, lots of solicitors, if they're giving legal advice, if you said to me, I really struggle with the written word. I'm dyslexic. It's lovely that you said you'd send it all to me, Claire, but that's not a lot of use. Then we could probably agree that I will give you my advice and then you can record me giving you a summary of that advice and a summary of your next steps.
Yeah.
So that everybody is very aware. And once it becomes overt, then of course it's completely different.
Yes. Yes.
So with professionals, you just need to have that conversation. What the reason that people worry about covert is it's always felt, and it's not always meant this way, but it is often felt as if you're trying to catch somebody out.
Yes, there's a bit of entrapment involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's the bit that it sort of leaves a stigma to it. So,
Mm.
I know lots of people say to me, and I really feel for them in that I record it because it's for my safety to be able to prove that I didn't do anything wrong.
Mhm.
And I understand that completely. But if you're going to do that, say it at the beginning. I am
Yeah.
recording this for my safety because you and I have both had a history of difficult moments. So I'm just going to put this on record because it protects both of us.
Yeah.
Then it's absolutely fine. So I understand it, I really do, because it must be really difficult if you know that you're walking into what you feel is an ambush situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just think about how you can use it better. Think about whether you should take somebody with you, somebody who's lovely and neutral and isn't going to be inflamed by the situation and that can just very nicely do it. What we don't want is altercations in front of children.
Yes. In any scenario,
In
whether they're
any
recorded or
situation.
not, it's
Yeah,
definitely not a good
exactly.
idea.
And, I always come back to, those little people are half you, half the other person.
Mhm.
They love both of you. They don't want to
Don't make them
witness
choose.
you
Yeah.
taking chunks out of each other. They may know that you don't like each other anymore, but they don't really want to witness it, and they
Yeah.
certainly. And also, don't forget that that kind of behaviour can be considered to be harassment,
Mhm.
and so it has knock-on effects. So the risks of doing these kind of covert recordings are there can be cost consequences in the court proceedings. So the court may
Okay.
feel that you have behaved inappropriately and may make a cost order against you. The other person might bring a civil action. So something, if they could show defamation, for example,
Mhm.
then they would be able to do that. They might go and get an injunction and say that they feel that you're stalking and harassing them. And
Yeah.
the worst, of course, is criminality in the fact that they could allege harassment, stalking, and suddenly you find yourself in a criminal court
Wow.
trying to justify.
Yeah.
So, as I said at the beginning, rather than looking at it as to how could I use it, it's
Yeah.
probably best to be saying to your lawyers or saying to the Citizens Advice Bureau, how do I gather that information without using a
In a
covert
safe way.
recording?
Yeah.
How do
Because
I do it?
that's a good point. So it's not just admissibility. It could actually backfire and be
Yeah.
used against you. And I'm assuming the judges don't look at this kind of thing very favorably to start with. Is there kind of a bit of a negative stigma around bringing a
There
covert recording?
is. Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to what we were just saying about that belief that somebody is trying to hijack you, that
Yeah.
they're trying to get you to say something. They know they're being recorded. So therefore they're going to behave impeccably and you're going to let yourself down because you don't know.
Yeah.
So you're almost, and I think that's where it's so hard for people because often people say to me, I'm doing it because how else do I show how
Yeah.
she behaves to me? And that's really hard if you've got an ex who is unkind to you,
Yeah.
um, and and behaves when other people are there,
Yeah.
which is often the dynamic.
Yes, it is indeed.
We're all quite well behaved in front of a third party. Most of us hold it together.
Hmm.
Um, and so it is really tricky for people to show it, but it is much better. And what we always suggest is if you look at, it's very hard to convince somebody on one incident. So
Yes,
if
that's
I
true
said
as
to
well.
you, you were rude to me last week, there's all sorts of reasons. You might have been having a bad day. You might not have been very well. You might have been caught on the hop. I might have asked you something outrageous. All of those kind of things might have got a reaction that wasn't what I expected or what I hoped for. If
Yeah.
you, when you're putting in your evidence, look at a whole range of evidence, then it's easier for a court to believe you because you can give examples. So what we
Yes.
say to people is actually really think about your evidence and think about, okay, so there's a pattern. It always happens after parents' evening. It always
Mm,
happens after this. Give the court something that is actually easier for them to understand because
mm,
the judges are there to help you, but they
yes.
need to understand how something happens. So most of us have patterns of behavior, we all do.
Yeah.
And there's things that really annoy us, you know. So the thing that makes me shout the quickest is if I call the children for dinner and they don't appear and I've cooked it and I think, oh, and so, you know, you start thinking about, right, well, that's a pattern that happens
Hmm.
every time. So you need to think about two things. One, if I change my pattern of behavior, because you can't change somebody else's, would
Yes.
it result in a change? Can
Hmm.
I try and do that? And then can I evidence that I tried something and it hasn't worked?
Hmm.
Because then you're going to have an awful lot more sympathy from a judge who thinks, well, actually, I can see that that didn't work. So the handover in Tesco's was a nightmare. So actually, you suggested that you did a handover outside of their nursery because that's familiar and it might be easier for you both. But actually, it was still not great. So I can see you're trying things. So therefore, I can see that this isn't just that you've just said, well, it's all on you. It's not my
Yes.
fault. I'm not doing anything. So those kind of patterns of behavior we can all demonstrate, and that's easier for a judge hearing that evidence to think, and it's easier for CAFCAS because they can say, well, okay, so if it didn't work here and it didn't work there, they can then
Yeah.
challenge the other parent to say, well, where would you suggest?
Hmm. Absolutely.
You know, rather
It
than
makes
just
them more
saying, well,
responsible.
handovers don't work, you know, which is often why people then record it because what they want to say is,
Yeah.
see, it doesn't work.
Mhm.
So
And
it's
so
about, sorry,
around I guess coming back to the admissibility piece, and you mentioned these three categories of recordings. Is the bar higher when it's a recording of a child than an adult to have it admitted to court?
it's not technically, but I think judges worry more about it because of the well-being of the child.
Yeah.
Because the I think it's because it goes one step further.
Hmm.
Because if the professional's been recorded or if the parent has been recorded, they will know in the proceedings anyway, because they will be
Yes, they'll
party to
find
it.
out. Yeah.
The risk of a child having to be told is just another layer.
Okay. So
And
they take
so
it that much
although
more seriously.
yeah, so
Yeah.
although no, they're all treated as a covert recording, I think any of us would say that where a child is involved, I think maybe our antennae is up even more.
Yes, which makes a lot of sense. And I guess it's slightly a rhetorical question because I think I know the answer, but I would assume there are additional implications if you start disseminating this recording, putting it online, sharing it with family, etc.
Yeah,
Would there
and
potentially
it
be criminal
snowballs.
repercussions?
Yeah, and it snowballs really quickly. You
Yeah.
know, not only is the risk there for harassment, stalking, defamation of character, all of those kind of things. But in children proceedings, you're not allowed to ever enable the child to be identified. And the moment you stick it online,
Yeah.
it's very difficult to work out who you're referring to. And so suddenly you're breaching all sorts of different orders because you are enabling a child who is a child of court proceedings to be identified without the
Yeah.
permission of the court.
So
So
a definite red line right
yeah,
there.
and it's the same with any social media, to be honest. The best thing anyone can do in any court proceedings is delete all social media. Do not
I
use
agree.
it.
Yeah,
It
neither for
amazes
advice
me.
or to share your story.
Yes, because everybody always comes in and has a friend of a friend who can access the other person's social media posts.
Yeah.
Always, I've never had anyone who can't.
Yeah.
And then all you're doing is it's like poking, isn't it? Continually.
Yeah, you're
And it's
fueling the fire.
Yeah, and it doesn't help. And also we all forget that if you wouldn't say it to somebody's face, don't put it on social media. And we
That's a good
seem
rule.
to forget that. And we
Yeah.
seem to have this ability to say things that we would never say.
Yeah, because you're saying it to a screen in that moment. You forget there's a human at the other end.
And I remember reading an article, this is years ago, because this is Sylvester Stallone, so shows how old I am. But he said he didn't post anything after 9 o'clock at night because he couldn't guarantee what kind of mood he would be in. And I just thought that's actually really good advice. I never thought I'd have advice from Sylvester Stallone, but I actually thought we could all learn from that of just if you think you may react or be reactionary, don't post.
Yeah, yeah. It's
And
not the right time to make that kind of decision.
no, and it sort of goes back to what your grandma would have said to you. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything nice at all.
Exactly. Absolutely. So are there any other mistakes that you would caution people against making when it comes to, recording people against their knowledge or without their knowledge?
Yeah, I just think don't do it, I think would be my big headline.
Yeah,
There is lots of ways that your solicitors can help you put across how somebody is.
yeah,
And don't forget, you're going to have an opportunity to give evidence, and so is the other person, but they're going to have to also be cross-examined.
yeah.
And in my experience, and I've been doing it a long time, people find it very difficult to keep up this wonderful persona of being Mary Poppins or being, superhero on the stand because barristers are paid to niggle you. Um,
Yes, and
and
they
so
can tease
you
it out.
do find that people say the most outrageous things. Um, and find it very difficult to justify their behavior.
Hmm.
So things come out in different ways. Um, I always think, and it's probably a little bit utopia. So, I do understand that if you're going through it and it's really, really difficult, it's really hard to do this. But if you think of your child and you put your child front and center, the best way you can overcome any of these things is by co-parenting and working together.
Hmm.
Now, none of us expect you to be best friends, but if you can be the best co-parent that you can be, if you can be the best mum or the best dad that you can be, then the child will benefit and you will
Absolutely.
have a better relationship than
Yeah.
any of these things. Because all of this, even if, let's just take it at its absolute best, you get a covert recording, it gets accepted by the court says, oh my goodness, what a shocking parent. You've still got a parent.
That's the thing. And that now that from that moment onwards, the trust is completely
The
destroyed.
trust is gone.
There's no moving back from
And you've
that.
still got a child in between who has to go between you and knows by then, and children always know far more than they should, knows how much you don't like them, how awful it was. They will have heard both sides in various degrees because even the best of us let things slip. I
Yeah.
don't think many people tell their children deliberately, but I think, I was speaking to someone ages ago who said that everybody manipulates their children because you do tomato pasta or creamy pasta, you do this or this, and you deliberately load the one that you want them to.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
do that in innocent settings. So it's not really surprising that when we're really hurting, we say things that probably we know we shouldn't,
Yeah.
but children pick up on all of those things.
Yeah.
They're like little sponges. It's the only time they don't hear you is when you want them to do something.
That's stuff you don't want them to hear. They tend to notice.
Absolutely. As soon as you don't want them to listen, they know everything.
And there is a risk, even, whether you put it on social media or whatever, that the children will see it and find this recording
Mm.
at some point. And that's also
Yeah.
something that you have to then live with and be able to, to justify to your children. And you have to think about the values you want to be sharing with them.
There's also some fabulous research going on at a couple of universities where they're looking at whether or not in the future,
Hmm.
children may have issues with their parents of putting stories about them on social media
Oh,
because, of course,
yes.
they're too young to consent. And where
Yeah.
does that leave them and what does that mean?
Oof.
Which I thought was fascinating because I hadn't
Yes.
actually thought about that. And I thought, oh my goodness, you could be sued by your child for putting an embarrassing birthday photo on there or something. But on a more serious basis, they may say, why did you share with my school community, what was
Yeah,
going on, that kind of.
absolutely. And it's a fair question, I think, at that stage.
Yeah.
Well,
And of
thank
course
you.
we know that future employers and things search social
They
media.
look online, absolutely. And even, I mean, I have my phone is synced to the iPad. My daughter uses the iPad, so pictures I take find
Yeah.
their way on the iPad and vice versa. So a recording that I think is just on my phone, would be accessible to her technically. So
Yeah.
there's things like that that we don't always realize with the technology we use.
Oh, absolutely. And don't forget, I suppose my biggest caution is our children are far smarter than we are with regards to any of this. And so, they will find it even if we can't. So,
Yes, yeah. Well, they're more techie for than us, that's for sure.
absolutely.
Well, Claire, this is all incredibly helpful, and I think the headline is very clear in terms of the advice you're giving. What would be your top three tips for somebody who has a recording and thinks that it might be their answer?
I think there's only really one, which is go and seek really good legal advice before you do anything with it. So
Yeah,
that you actually go, and I know it costs money and I know solicitors are expensive, so I do understand that. But rather than doing something and then having heartbreak later or finding there's ramifications that you hadn't thought of,
yeah,
go and see a solicitor and get really good advice as to what can I do, what shouldn't I do, should I delete it? Should I use it? Could you keep it just in case? All of those kind of questions that you're naturally going to have.
yeah.
Go and get that advice really early on. Don't do something that you then can't come back from.
Yes, I think that's a good point. Getting that advice so you make sure that you're not doing anything that might end up hurting you in the end, even though
Yeah,
the intentions aren't that.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Claire. So much information. This is really, really interesting. How can people reach you if they need support?
So we can be reached at www.familysolutionsnow.co.uk, and that's our website. And there's all sorts of information on that. Or you can telephone us on 02392 481183.
Perfect. And I'll put all that in the notes as well for the episode so people can reach out to you directly if they need more advice.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Have a great day.